So today I was originally going to do Michelle Obama versus Melania Trump. So if you guys don't want to see that, comment that down below. But I've decided, since we just talked about the West Virginia Senate election in 2018, I decided to do the incumbent Senator Joe Manchin and retiring senator from Arizona, Senator Jeff Flake. So I think this would be pretty interesting. We have a so-called conservative Democrat and so-called liberal Republican, or just a Republican who opposes the president and is somehow correlated with not agreeing with Republican views. Flake is more of a Mitt Romney Republican, but in this scenario, just based off how America perceives him, he's anti-Trump, so in turn would just make the American people believe he's not technically someone who's pro-Republican. So obviously that's not the case, but when we're talking about American politics, a lot of the things that we hear in the national news media don't actually end up being true, or they're just completely misconformed. Or if we talk about something like the Hillary Clinton email scandal, blown extremely out of proportion, or something like Benghazi, millions of dollars poured into an investigation that turned up nothing. And, the whole lock her up thing was overplayed by the media on the Trump part, and, nothing ever happened when we came to a Trump presidency. I mean, Hillary Clinton's not in jail. She's never going to be in jail, and she's never going to be found guilty of anything. And that's just how it is. And when we're talking about things like the wall, that was definitely overhyped by the media. It was constantly questioned to the president, and now he feels sort of pressured. He was originally going to do it. We're not going to see it happen right away, of course, because it doesn't happen overnight. But again, things are definitely pressured by the media. So in this scenario, the media would definitely overplay both parts of these candidates impacting or going against their own political parties. Joe Manchin, more of a conservative, not technically voting with how the other Democrats vote, and Jeff Flake, of course, not voting with how the other Republicans vote, or pretty much showing disrespect and not supporting the president whatsoever. So when we're talking about this electoral map, we're not going to see the same excitement levels on the Flake side that we saw for Donald Trump, and we're not going to see the same excitement levels amongst minorities, amongst white people for Joe Manchin. We actually may see a spike in white voters, but when it comes to minorities, which make up the base of the Democratic Party, some states may or may not be so keen on voting for someone like Joe Manchin, and the Republicans' turnout could overwhelm and win for Jeff Flake. So when we're talking about the Western Coast, clearly that goes to Senator Joe Manchin for obvious reasons. Democratic identity. When we go across the Midwest, it's typical. Republican identity, Republican territory. It's not going to flip in the near future. And we talk about a state like Arizona, of course Jeff Flake is going to win his home state. He's probably also going to carry the state of Nevada. I mean, we have Dean Heller, who's almost identical to Jeff Flake, being a senator there, and Joe Manchin's appeal won't go too far to Nevada. Maybe against someone like the president who lost the state before, but Jeff Flake likely could win this state against Joe Manchin, but I don't see him carrying Colorado or New Mexico. These are states that have Democratic identity. History tells us these states are going blue. Now we filled in around half of the United States. The rest of the South is easily going to Jeff Flake. I don't see a Manchin victory in states that we saw before. So like North Carolina, possible. Georgia isn't really possible. South Carolina, not really possible. When it comes to Florida, that one could be perceived as a pure toss-up. And North Carolina as well, a pure toss-up. Virginia and West Virginia, I both see going for Joe Manchin. West Virginia, people might say is out of the reach for someone like Joe Manchin, but against someone like Jeff Flake, probably not. And especially up in the Northeast, we're not going to see a Jeff Flake victory in typical Democratic states like Illinois, states like Vermont, Massachusetts, the District of Columbia even. Not going to see that happen for Jeff Flake. Up in New Hampshire, I do see a Joe Manchin victory, just based off how Joe Manchin could better appeal to Northeastern voters, and I see him carrying all of Maine. Maine's probably not going to split for anyone but Donald Trump when it comes to Republicans, and now we're looking at where Manchin or Flake could win the presidency. So the Rust Belt is pure toss-up. We don't really see a clear victor in a number of these races, but I'm going to make a call right now. So I think Jeff Flake could carry the state of Florida very narrowly. I also see him carrying the state of Iowa. These are two states that are conservative bases, but when they're excited to come out and vote, they typically go Republican. I get it. Jeff Flake is no Donald Trump, but he's also someone more like Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was poised to win Florida, but he was running against a minority. Manchin doesn't have that minority boost in a state like Florida. He doesn't have the Latino vote, the African-American vote, to boost him up in these numbers, especially when it comes to urban areas. Florida is probably going to be led by Republicans unless there's a minority candidate or someone who's closely tied to a former minority candidate, someone like Joe Biden, or someone who can turn over some white voters like Bernie Sanders. But Joe Manchin could probably do better with white voters than other Democrats, but not in a state like Florida. We could see it in the Rust Belt, which we're going to talk about in just a second, but Florida is not that area for Joe Manchin to win. When we talk about the Rust Belt, I see the Rust Belt going for someone like Joe Manchin. It's really hard how not to see the Rust Belt going for Joe Manchin. He is a pretty strong candidate, and we're at a point where a state like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania could go to someone who definitely appeals to their working class voters, okay, the steel working voters, the coal industry, things that matter to areas around Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all states that voted for Donald Trump after being safe Democratic for so long. We see a Manchin rebound and a Democratic rebound in these states, lashing back to the Democratic Party. And going to the Democratic slot. But Ohio, I see going for Jeff Flake. More moderate Republicans win here than ever. I mean, we've seen it with John Kasich, especially in the Republican primary, or even in the governor's race, or in the governor's primary we just saw in 2018, which I might make a video on tomorrow. Ohio typically nominates moderate Republicans. I didn't know the word for it for a second. But Jeff Flake is a moderate Republican. He's probably going to win there. I also see him carrying a state like North Carolina. Being so closely related to someone like Mitt Romney, state of North Carolina is really hard to see how it can't go for someone like Jeff Flake. Now we go to the final state, the state of Minnesota. Is the Russell Rust going? Minnesota is also going. Yes, they had someone like Marco Rubio win the Republican primary, but that doesn't mean much when it comes to a presidential level. Bernie Sanders wouldn't carry West Virginia just because he overwhelmingly won the primary. That's not how things work. When it comes to Senate election and governor elections, you might want to look at the primary numbers. Yes, they have implications, but when it comes to a presidential level, they're not the most accurate. So final electoral map, Jeff Flake, 260 electoral votes, the loser in this presidential election. Joe Manchin, 278 electoral votes. Thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all tomorrow.